The medieval royal bedchamber was hugely important, but then it wasn't just a place for the monarch to sleep. It was also where he conducted the day-to-day business of being king, holding meetings with his courtiers. The most trusted of them, the Lord Chamberlain, was literally the lord of his bedchamber, and he needed to travel around his realm to show himself to his people, maintaining order and discouraging rebellion simply by his presence.
If you look at the last 7 medieval kings, and by that I mean the 7 running up to Henry VIII, no less than 4 of them seized the throne by violence. That means they weren't inheriting it from their fathers as the result of activity in the royal bedroom. At this period, the battlefield is still a better means of gaining power.
When Henry Tudor ended the Wars of the Roses with his victory in 1485, he finally brought stability to the monarchy and the country. His Tudor successors would no longer constantly have to pack up their beds and go campaigning to protect their realm against usurpers.
By the time we get to the reign of Henry VIII, the royal lifestyle has settled down a bit. He is still travelling from palace to palace, but each one now has a dedicated, specialised bedchamber.
Considering that Henry had 60 palaces to choose from, it's a shame that none of his Tudor bedrooms survive. Although we can look elsewhere to get a glimpse of the sort of bed he would have slept in. This is Hever Castle in Kent, in the Tudor period home to the famous Boleyn family. We know that Henry visited Hever, and if he stayed over, Thomas Boleyn, the head of the house, would have had to give up his bed for his monarch. This bed is a typical Tudor affair, solid oak and decorated all over with intricate carvings. Tudor monarchs slept a little more peacefully than their medieval predecessors, but there were still some disruptions. Even royal beds were infested with fleas. Henry VIII took a little piece of fur to bed with him, so that the bugs would jump onto that instead of sucking his own blue blood. And there were security checks too. Before bedtime, servants would roll across his bed to check that assassins hadn't concealed a dagger in the straw mattress. The future and the stability of the monarchy was beginning to shift, away from the battlefield and into the royal bedroom. It was here that the long-term success of the dynasty would be decided.
Now, at first, the Tudors could be said to have quite a tenuous grasp on the crown, couldn't they? Henry VII, he seized it from Richard III. How does he go about building up a stable dynasty?
The best way of doing that, of course, was to make a good marriage and then, of course, to have an heir, which is exactly what Henry did. He married soon after his accession, and within a very short time, he managed to have an heir, Prince Arthur.
So marriage and the birth of children, they're central. Matters of the bedroom are central.
Really, we can consider the bed as our kind of theatre or stage upon which all the key events are going to play out.
When you read accounts of the wedding of Prince Arthur and Catherine, the Spanish princess, it's almost voyeuristic, the detail. We get to see them going to bed together.
You can just imagine sort of Catherine looking at Arthur and Arthur looking at Catherine and thinking,
we're for it, we've got to do this
we've
now.
got to get busy. And of course, so massive expectation. And of course, although everybody would withdraw, you can imagine all the kind of whisperings outside the door, exactly, to know what was going on. And so, of course, when the couple emerged in the morning, there was great expectation. What had happened that wedding night becomes hugely important because within just less than a year, Arthur dies. Catherine of Aragon is left a widow. She's too important a figure to remain unmarried. She is the daughter of Spain. And so what happens? She marries Henry VIII, brother to Prince Arthur. The marriage is happy for a while. Then, when no male heir emerges, Henry decides that he wants an annulment. His attention has wandered to Anne Boleyn. And the key issue in order to get that annulment becomes events 30 years before, way back in the bedchamber of Arthur and Catherine of Aragon.
The controversy is when Henry wants his divorce from Catherine, he needs to prove that Arthur and Catherine did consummate their marriage, and she needs to prove that they didn't.
Yes, I mean, he turns to the text of Leviticus, where it says that a man shouldn't lie with his brother's widow, and suddenly says, aha, this is evidence that I should never have married anyway. And so any of those people that were around at the time were called upon to describe what had happened. One of those sources describes how the morning after the wedding, the morning after the night before, when Prince Arthur emerges from the bedchamber, he brags to one of the grooms of the chamber that, you know, bring me a drink for I'm thirsty because I've spent the night in the midst of Spain, which is a hot region.
He could have just been showing off, in my opinion.
Bawdy adolescence, perhaps, but who's to say? Catherine remains absolutely committed to the line that she never had sex with Prince Arthur. Therefore, it's absolutely fine and above board for her to have married his brother Henry VIII.
So it's like a little keyhole detail, isn't it? It's such an intimate thing, and yet it's a matter of international diplomacy.
Exactly. The marriage bed, which we sort of see as a private space, is the stage, the sort of great public arena through which these key issues of the Tudor monarchy are played out, really.
Catherine of Aragon endured great personal suffering as a result of this investigation into her sex life. But it was also to have extraordinary consequences for the nation as a whole. Gossip from a Tudor bedroom had given Henry the excuse he needed for his divorce, ultimately leading to the break from Rome and the birth of the Church of England. It was clear that a king's performance, or non-performance, in the royal bedroom could now transform the future of the country. The pressure to produce new members of the dynasty became even more intense as the Queen's crown passed to Anne Boleyn. Catching Henry's fancy wasn't enough to ensure Anne's success. She had to produce a male heir. As with Catherine, Anne's fate and the fate of the nation would be decided in the royal bedroom. To make sure that a royal baby, heir to the throne, was healthy and safely delivered, a Tudor queen's pregnancy was closely monitored. So on the 26th of August, 1533, following the announcement that Anne was going to have a baby, she was confined to her bedchamber at Greenwich Palace. The doors were closed, the windows were blocked, fires were lit, and the darkened room was prepared with candles and aromatic oils. Despite the stifling summer heat, Anne would have to spend the next 8 weeks in this stuffy cocoon. Every moment of her pregnancy was witnessed by a gaggle of women selected from the Tudor court.
It must have been horrible for Anne to be trapped in what sounds like a really oppressive environment for such a long time, at the height of summer, with all these people watching her. And when the baby was born, it was a disappointment. Everybody had been hoping and praying for a boy to secure the succession, but Anne's baby was a girl. For her, this was a personal tragedy. It was a step on the journey towards her fall and ultimately her execution. The trauma of this event and the importance that was attached to it showed how the future of the succession would now unfold in the royal bedchamber. And the Tudor dynasty's anxiety about its future would all be centred in the royal bed.
As the number of Henry's wives mounted up, people's scrutiny of what was going on between the royal sheets got more and more intense and intimate and quite extraordinary in its detail.
When Henry VIII wants to get rid of his fourth wife, Anne of Cleves, his line is that Anne was just too unattractive. He couldn't bring himself to consummate the marriage. But this was a risky strategy, because people may have said, well, it's Henry's fault. The king is now old, he's becoming impotent. So to counter this, Henry does something quite extraordinary. He has his doctor, Dr. Buzz, make an announcement in the House of Lords that the king has still got it in the bedroom department. Dr. Butts tells the Lords that the king's had duas pollutiones nocturnus insomno. That means 2 nocturnal pollutions, 2 emissions. This is intended to show that the king is still very capable of fathering a child.
In the Tudor period, then, inadequacies in the royal bedroom had been instrumental in the divorce and downfall of 4 of Henry's 6 queens. And when none of his children produced heirs of their own, it was the end of the Tudor dynasty.